I spent 10 years building my father's business. He just left it all to my stepsister's boyfriend. I traded 10 years of my life for a legacy that was sold to a stranger over a single dinner. My father didn't just replace me as CEO, he replaced me as his son, handing my sweat and blood to my stepsister's boyfriend. He thought he was choosing new blood, but he didn't realize that without me, the heart of the company had already stopped beating. The ink on a contract has a specific smell, metallic, cold, final, but it's nothing compared to the scent of a father's betrayal. I spent 3,650 days building a kingdom that was never meant to be mine. I just didn't know it until the crown was placed on a stranger's head. My father, Arthur, is a man of heavy silences and starched collars. He started Vanguard Logistics in a garage with 2 rusted trucks and a mortgage he couldn't afford. By the time I joined him, fresh out of university with a degree I'd earned while working the night shifts at his warehouse, Vanguard was a respectable mid-sized firm, but it was tired. It was leaking money through outdated routes and paper-thin margins. "Leo," he told me that first Monday morning, leaning back in a leather chair that creaked under the weight of his expectations, "the blood in this company is thick, but it's slow. You're the heartbeat now. Don't let me down." And I didn't. For 10 years, I was the first one in and the last one out. I traded my 20s for logistics spreadsheets and midnight calls from drivers stranded in snowstorms. I knew the name of every client's spouse, their favorite whiskey, and the exact pressure points of their supply chains. I didn't just manage the business, I became the business. Under my hand, Vanguard grew from a local player to a regional powerhouse. We tripled our fleet. We moved into high-tech pharmaceuticals, a niche I carved out through sheer persistence, winning over proprietary clients who followed me because they trusted my word, not the logo on the letterhead. My father, Arthur, watched this growth with a quiet, nodding approval. We didn't talk much about feelings. Arthur wasn't that kind of man, but we talked about the legacy. "When I step back, Leo," he'd say during our Sunday dinners, his eyes reflecting the amber of his scotch, "this will all be yours to steer. You've earned the helm." I believed him. I built my life around that promise. I delayed starting a family. I missed my best friend's wedding because of a labor strike. I poured every ounce of my identity into the brick and mortar of Vanguard. Then came Elena. My father met her 3 years ago, a widow with a sharp smile and an even sharper daughter, Maya. I was happy for him, truly. He had been lonely since my mother passed, and Elena brought a softness back to his house. But Maya brought something else. Her boyfriend, Julian. He was everything I wasn't. He was polished, soft-handed, and possessed a silver tongue that seemed to wag only when my father was in the room. He worked in consulting, a vague term that mostly involved him wearing expensive loafers and talking about synergy while I was in the yard at 5 a.m. checking engine manifests. At first, I ignored it. I treated him like a guest, but then the questions started. My father began asking me to run things by Julian to get a fresh perspective. "He's family now, Leo," my father said one evening, his voice uncharacteristically defensive. "He has a vision for the future. You've done the heavy lifting, but Julian, he understands the modern market." I felt a cold prickle of unease, like the first frost of a long winter. I looked at my father, the man I had served with a decade of loyalty, and saw a stranger looking back. He wasn't looking at my results anymore. He was looking at a new shiny toy. The first real crack happened at the annual Founders Gala. It was supposed to be the night my father announced his retirement and my succession. I had the speech in my pocket. I had practiced it in the mirror until my eyes were red. We stood on the dais, the smell of expensive perfume and catering filling the room. My father gripped the microphone. I stood a half step behind him, ready to take the mantle. Vanguard has always been about the future, and to ensure that future, I am proud to announce the new CEO and majority shareholder of Vanguard Logistics. He paused, and for a second, he looked at me, not with pride, but with a flicker of something that looked like guilt. "Julian Thorne." The room went silent. I felt the air leave my lungs as if I'd been struck in the solar plexus. I watched Julian step forward, a smug, practiced humility on his face as he shook my father's hand. I didn't hear the rest of the speech. I didn't hear the polite, confused applause. I only heard the sound of 10 years of my life snapping like dry kindling. I looked at my stepsister, Maya, who was filming the moment on her phone, a triumphant glint in her eyes. I looked at Elena, who was beaming, and finally, I looked at my father. He wouldn't meet my gaze. The silence that followed the applause was, for me, deafening. I stood on that stage like a ghost haunting my own life. People began to filter toward the bar, their eyes darting toward me with that awkward, sideways pity that feels like a physical weight. I didn't make a scene. My father had taught me that much. Dignity was the only currency he truly valued. I stepped off the dais, my legs feeling like lead, and walked straight to the coat check. "Leo, wait!" It was my father. He caught up to me near the mahogany exit doors, his breath smelling of expensive bourbon and regret. He reached out to touch my shoulder, but I flinched. It wasn't a conscious choice. It was a reflex, like pulling a hand away from a stove. "Leo, son, let's talk in the office," he whispered, his eyes darting around to see who was watching. "It's not what you think. Julian has ideas, global ideas that we need to scale. You're the backbone, Leo. You'll still be the chief of operations. You'll be the one actually running the show while he handles the vision." I looked at him then, really looked at him. The gray in his hair seemed thinner, his posture less certain. He wasn't looking for a successor. He was looking for a way to please his new wife by elevating her son. He wanted me to be the engine while Julian sat in the driver's seat and took the credit. "You're asking me to train the man who just stole my life, Dad?" My voice was a low rasp. "Don't be dramatic," he snapped, the old hard Arthur returning for a second. "It's a business decision. Julian has an MBA from a top-tier school. He speaks the language of the modern investor. You're a boots-on-the-ground guy, Leo. That's a compliment." "A boots-on-the-ground guy?" I repeated. The words tasted like ash. 10 years, 80 hours a week. I saved this company in 2018 when the fuel prices spiked. I brought in the Pfizer contract. I haven't taken a vacation in 4 years because you said the legacy depended on me. "And it does," he insisted, his voice rising. "But Julian is family now. Maya and Elena, they're part of this. We have to look forward." I didn't say another word. I turned and walked out into the cold night air. The city lights were blurred by a sudden stinging moisture in my eyes that I refused to let fall. The next morning, I arrived at the office at 5 a.m., just as I had for a decade. The smell of stale coffee and industrial cleaner greeted me. I sat at my desk, a desk littered with photos of me and my father at truck rallies, at ribbon cuttings, at the warehouse opening. I realized then that every memory was tied to a ledger. Our relationship wasn't father and son, it was employer and elite laborer. By 8 a.m., Julian strolled in. He wasn't wearing a suit. He was wearing a cashmere sweater and a smirk. He didn't even knock. He just pushed my door open and leaned against the frame. "Morning, Leo," he said, checking his gold watch. "Tough night, I'm sure. But look, I want us to be a team. I've been looking at the proprietary accounts you handle. The pharma stuff? It's a bit localized, isn't it? I'm thinking we outsource the logistics to a third party and just take a brokerage fee. Less overhead, more synergy." I looked at the Pfizer file on my desk. Those clients didn't sign with Vanguard. They signed with me. They signed because I personally inspected every refrigerated trailer at 3 a.m. to ensure their life-saving cargo wouldn't spoil. "Outsource it?" I asked, my voice dangerously calm. "Our clients pay for the Vanguard touch. They pay for the reliability I built." Julian chuckled, dry, hollow sound. "They pay for a service, Leo. They don't care who's driving the truck, as long as the app shows a green checkmark. Anyway, I'll need the master contact list and the contract renewals by EOD. My team, my actual consulting team, is coming in at noon to start the transition." He didn't wait for an answer. He turned on his heel and walked toward my father's office, which was now his office. I sat in the silence for a long time. I thought about the moral weight of loyalty. I had been loyal to a fault. I had protected my father's interests above my own health, my own happiness, my own future, and in return, I was being asked to hand over the keys to the kingdom to a man who didn't know the difference between a diesel engine and a transmission. I opened my desk drawer and pulled out a single sheet of stationery. My hand didn't shake. Effective immediately, I resigned from my position at Vanguard Logistics. But I wasn't just leaving, I was taking the soul of the company with me. I picked up the phone and made 3 calls. To Mr. Henderson at the Pharma Labs, to Sarah at the Regional Medical Supply, and to David, our head of fleet operations, who had been with me since day 1. It's happening, I told them. The change we discussed. We're with you, Leo. We don't know it, Julian. We only know you. I spent the next 4 hours cleaning out my digital footprint. I didn't steal anything that wasn't mine, but the relationships, the trust, that didn't belong to the Vanguard name. It belonged to the man who answered the phone on Christmas Day when a shipment went sideways. At 11:45 a.m., I walked into my father's office. Julian was sitting in my father's chair, feet up on the desk. My father was standing by the window, looking out at the fleet he was about to lose. I laid the letter on the desk. "I'm done," I said. My father turned, his face paling. "Leo, don't be foolish. Take a week off. You're just emotional." "I'm not emotional, Dad. I'm liberated. You wanted new blood. Well, here it is. I hope it's enough to keep the heart beating." I walked out of the building. I didn't look back at the logo. I didn't look at the trucks. I just got into my car and drove. I knew something they didn't. Julian thought he bought a gold mine. He didn't realize he just inherited a very expensive, very empty cave.
The silence of my house that first Monday morning was a physical weight. For 10 years, my life had been measured in the frantic rhythm of vibrating phones and the smell of industrial espresso. Now there was only the ticking of a wall clock and the steam rising from a cup of tea I actually had time to finish. I didn't launch a rival company immediately. I didn't have to. I simply sat in my home office and waited for the world to realize what my father had forgotten. A business is not a building or a bank account. It is a series of promises kept by people who give a damn. The first call came on Wednesday. It was from Sarah, the logistics director at the Regional Medical Supply Chain. "Leo," her voice was tight, the kind of tone she used when a shipment of insulin was sitting on a hot tarmac. "I just got off the phone with this Julian character. He told me our white glove delivery service is being folded into a general freight pool to optimize the bottom line. Is he insane?" I leaned back, looking out at the rain hitting my window. "He's the CEO, Sarah. He's looking for synergy. He's looking for a lawsuit," she snapped. "We have a 3-year exclusivity agreement based on the specialized handling protocols you wrote. If Vanguard isn't providing the drivers I know and trust, the contract is void. Where are you, Leo? Because I'm not staying with a ghost ship." "I'm taking a breath, Sarah," I said gently, "but I'll be in touch soon, very soon." By Friday, the trickle became a flood. My phone, my personal one, was glowing red. Drivers, men I'd shared cold sandwiches with in the middle of the night, were texting me photos of the new efficiency memos Julian was posting in the break room. He was cutting overtime. He was mandating new routing software that added 2 hours to every shift because the algorithm didn't understand local construction patterns. I didn't reply. I was waiting for the one call that mattered. It came 3 weeks later, not from a client, but from my father. "Leo," he said, and I could hear the exhaustion in his voice. "We need you to come in, just for a consulting meeting. Julian he's having some friction with the pharma accounts." "Friction, Dad? Or a fire?" "Don't be like that," he pleaded. "The Pfizer account is threatening to pull out. They say the service has degraded." Julian tried to explain the long-term benefits of the restructuring, but they won't listen. "They want to talk to you." "I don't work for Vanguard, Arthur," I said, using his name for the first time in my life. It felt like a stone dropping into a well. "I'm a private citizen. If Julian is the visionary, let him envision a way out of this." I hung up. The pit of my stomach churned, partly from from guilt, but mostly from a cold, hard satisfaction. I wasn't being petty. I was showing my father exactly what he had valued my decade of labor at: zero. 2 months in, the cracks became craters. Maya, my stepsister, posted a photo on social media of her and Julian on a private yacht in the Greek Isles. The caption read, "Celebrating a record-breaking first quarter. Hashtag CEO life. Hashtag new blood." I knew the truth. I still had friends in the accounting department. The record-breaking quarter was a result of Julian selling off our oldest, most reliable trucks to show a one-time cash infusion on the balance sheet. He was cannibalizing the fleet to pay for his lifestyle. He was burning the furniture to keep the house warm. I decided it was time. I didn't need a fancy office. I rented a small space in an industrial park, just 2 rooms and a high-speed internet connection. I called my old head of fleet, David. "Dave," I said, "I'm starting Titan Logistics. I have 5 clients ready to sign today if I can guarantee them the old team. Are you in?" "Dave? Leo?" David laughed, a rough, gravelly sound. "I've had my bags packed since the day you walked out. Half the drivers are just waiting for the word. We're tired of being treated like numbers on a spreadsheet by a guy who wears a $3,000 watch to a loading dock." The migration was quiet, but it was total. One by one, the proprietary clients I had nurtured for years sent formal notices of termination to Vanguard. They didn't cite Julian's incompetence, though there was plenty of it. They cited material breach of service standards. The house of cards was wobbling, and then the wind really started to blow. I was sitting in my new office, staring at the first Titan logo on my screen, when my front door swung open. It wasn't my father. It was Elena, my stepmother. Her face was flushed, her expensive silk scarf askew. "You're destroying him," she hissed, slamming her purse onto my desk. "Arthur is a shell of himself. He spent 40 years building that company, and you're tearing it down just because your ego is bruised." I looked at her, and for the first time, I didn't feel the need to be the good son. "I didn't tear anything down, Elena," I said calmly. "I simply took my hands off the pillars. If the building fell over the moment I stopped holding it up, maybe it wasn't as strong as you thought. You're stealing his clients. You're stealing his drivers. I'm not stealing anything. Those people choose who they trust. They don't trust Julian, and apparently," I leaned forward, "neither does the market. You have to stop," she whispered, her voice cracking. "We have debts, Leo. The expansion Julian planned, it required loans, personal guarantees Arthur signed. If the company fails, your father loses everything. The house, the savings, everything." I felt a pang then, a real one. My father's house, my mother's garden, the history of my childhood was tied to those walls. But then I remembered the look on Arthur's face when he handed my life's work to a stranger. "He chose Julian," I said, my heart turning to ice. "Julian is the visionary. Let him find the money."
The call didn't come from my father. It came from the bank. In a small town or even a tight-knit industry, secrets have the shelf life of open milk. An old contact in commercial lending, a man I'd helped out years ago when Vanguard was just starting its pharmaceutical expansion, phoned me on a Tuesday evening. "Leo," he said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, "I'm looking at a foreclosure notice for the Vanguard main warehouse and the personal residence on High Ridge. Your father, he put them up as collateral for a short-term liquidity loan Julian took out last month. The payment was due yesterday. It bounced." I sat in my car, the engine idling, watching the rain smear the windshield into a blurred mosaic. High Ridge. That was the house where my mother's height markings were still etched into the pantry door frame. That was the house I had worked 80-hour weeks to protect during the 2008 crash. I didn't feel triumph. I felt a sick, hollow dread. I drove to my father's house. I didn't call first. I pulled into the circular driveway and saw Julian's silver sports car parked haphazardly across the lawn, one wheel crushing a flower bed my mother had planted 20 years ago. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of expensive cigars and desperation. I found them in the study. My father was slumped in his chair, looking 10 years older than he had 2 months ago. Julian was pacing, a frantic energy in his movements, shouting into a cell phone about venture capital, bridge loans. Elena was crying softly. Corner. "Get out, Julian," I said. The room went silent. Julian stopped pacing, his face reddening. "You have no right to be here, Leo. This is private property. We're in the middle of a strategic get
out," I repeated, my voice like a serrated blade. "Or I call the police and report the unauthorized use of company funds I've been hearing from the auditors. I know about the consulting fees you've been paying to your own shell company, Julian. I know about the yacht, and I know the bank is calling the sheriff tomorrow morning." Julian's bravado vanished like mist. He looked at my father, then at Elena, and finally back at me. He saw the cold, hard truth in my eyes. I wasn't the boots-on-the-ground guy anymore. I was the storm. He grabbed his jacket and stormed out without a word to Maya or Elena. The front door slammed, and a minute later we heard the roar of his engine as he fled the sinking ship. My father didn't look up. He kept his eyes fixed on a spot on the rug. "He said it was a sure thing, Leo," my father whispered. "He said we needed to disrupt the market. He said you were holding us back with your old-fashioned loyalty." "Loyalty isn't old-fashioned, Dad," I said, sitting across from him. "It's the only currency that doesn't devalue. You traded 10 years of my life for a vision that didn't include the people who actually do the work." "I'm going to lose the house," he choked out, finally looking at me. His eyes were watery, the fire completely extinguished. "I bought the debt, Dad," I said quietly. He blinked, confused. "What?" "I opened Titan Logistics 2 months ago. We've already secured 60% of Vanguard's former contracts. I took the profits and the line of credit I established, and I bought the note from the bank this afternoon. I am your primary creditor now." Elena gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. My father just stared. "So you're taking the house?" he asked, his voice trembling. "No," I said. "I'm taking the company, what's left of it. I'm merging Vanguard into Titan. The Vanguard name is dead. It's been dragged through the mud by Julian for too long. But the trucks, the warehouse, and the remaining drivers, they'll be under my banner now." "And me?" my father asked. I looked at the man who had betrayed me, who had chosen new blood over the son who had bled for him. I saw a man who had made a catastrophic mistake, but who was still my father. "I'm retiring you," I said firmly. "Effective tonight. You'll keep the house. I've put it into a trust that you can't touch and Julian can't borrow against. You'll have enough to live comfortably, but you are never to step foot on a loading dock again. You're done, Dad." He lowered his head and began to sob, harsh, jagged sounds of relief and shame. I walked out of the study and into the hallway. Elena followed me, trying to grab my arm, her eyes full of some desperate gratitude. I brushed her off. "This isn't for you," I told her, "and it isn't for him. It's for the drivers, it's for the clients who trusted me, and it's for the kid who spent 10 years building a kingdom he finally had to buy back with his own sweat." I stepped out into the night. The rain had stopped. The air was cold and clean. I looked at my phone. A text from David. "The first Titan truck just cleared the state line with the Pfizer shipment. All green, Leo." I took a deep breath. For the first time in a decade, the weight on my shoulders didn't feel like a burden. It felt like a foundation. The merger wasn't a celebration. It was an autopsy. I spent the next 6 months in the trenches, cleaning up the wreckage Julian had left behind. There were unpaid invoices hidden in drawers, maintenance logs that had been forged, and a morale so low it felt like walking through a graveyard. But slowly, the Titan blue began to replace the Vanguard gold on the side of the trucks, and with the new name came the old spirit. I'll never forget the morning we reopened the main hub under the new banner. I stood on the same loading dock where I'd started as a teenager. David was there, holding a clipboard, a genuine smile on his weathered face. The drivers, the ones who had stayed and the ones who had returned, didn't offer me a round of applause. They offered me something better, a nod of respect as they climbed into their cabs. They knew that with me, the paycheck would clear and the word would be kept. My father stayed at High Ridge. We don't talk much anymore. The legacy he was so worried about survived, but not in the way he imagined. He spends his days in the garden, a shadow of the Titan he used to be. Sometimes I visit on Sundays, and we sit in a silence that is no longer heavy, just empty. He knows he traded a son for a stranger, and while I've forgiven him for the sake of my own peace, the bridge we once shared is a ruin that can't be rebuilt. Elena and Maya moved out not long after the bank's intervention. Once the CEO title was gone and the credit cards were frozen, the family Julian had promised evaporated. Last I heard, Julian was trying to to sell a crypto investment scheme in another state. Some people never learn that you can't build a skyscraper on a foundation of sand. As for me, I'm still the first one in, but I'm no longer the last one out. I've learned that a business isn't a life, it's a vehicle. I finally took that vacation I'd delayed for 4 years. I went to the mountains, where the air is thin and the only logistics I had to worry about was the trail beneath my boots. Looking down at the world from that height, I realized that the 10 years I lost weren't lost at all. They were a tuition I paid in sweat and heartbreak to learn the most valuable lesson of all. You cannot inherit respect, and you cannot buy loyalty. You have to earn them, 1 mile at a time. I'm no longer building my father's business. I'm building my own life, and for the first time, the crown fits perfectly, because I'm the one who forged it. Looking back, I don't regret the 80-hour weeks or the cold nights on the dock. I regret thinking that my value was tied to someone else's approval. It took losing everything for me to realize that I already had everything I needed within myself. Justice isn't always a loud explosion or a dramatic courtroom scene. Sometimes, justice is just the quiet satisfaction of knowing that while they had the title, you always had the truth. If you were in my shoes, would you have saved the man who betrayed you, or would you have let the kingdom burn? Tell me your thoughts in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please consider subscribing to the channel. It helps us continue to share these journeys of the human heart. Thank you for listening.